Hello and welcome to this special edition of Dialogue with the World. I'm Panis Athanasiou with the Greek Public Television, and we are in Rhodes Island in Greece, at the crossroads of three continents. This is another edition of our co-production with the Chinese CGTN, the third year in a row. And here is my co-host and a good friend from Benzene, our partner from CGTN, Mr. Jan Rui. Hello and welcome to Greece.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fanis. I'm so impressed by the waves, the beach, and above all, the beauty of the sunset. We enjoy very much the close partnership with ERT, the host television channel in Greece, which delivered the first democracy to the Western civilization. However, the issue today is not about democracy. It's about, rather, governance. What kind of governance would be working best for each individual economy the world over?
And of course, today we're going to discuss about important topics. We're going to discuss Greek-Chinese relations. We're going to discuss China's relation with Europe, Syria, the Turkish invasion in Syria, and EU integration.
These are very interesting issues in what promises to be very interesting brainstorming and intellectual conversation. To begin with, let me introduce our guest speakers on this side of the panel, Mr. Henry Wang Huyao, founder and the president of Center for China Globalization, a think tank based in Beijing, and Professor James Galbraith from the School of Lyndon Johnson. It's about public affairs.
And Mr. Yannis Koutsomitis. Yannis Koutsomitis is a columnist with Philadelphia's Daily, and Yannis is very active in social media.
I believe you have written many articles about the bilateral relationship between China and Greece, a very close business partnership. However, I noticed that your government, be it old one or the new one, struggles very hard to maintain a balance between China and the United States. Tell me whether the new government will be supportive of our investment and projects there as the previous administration did successfully.
Yes. Well, the new government is very investment friendly. They have shown it and have been very vocal in supporting foreign investment in Greece. This is a basic argument to consider the new government being friendly to Chinese investment in Greece. There are legitimate fears, though, that there will be some resistance for our American partners regarding especially high technology investments and especially the 5G network. But we should think that we should take into account that the Chinese investment in Athens port is very successful. It has created jobs, it has brought new business, so it's a good foundation to build on a more and more added investment for the next years.
Excuse me, but the issue with our close partnership with Greece is whether the success of our investment in Greece will open the gateway to continental Europe. In this area, I'm afraid Brussels has worries and concerns. Don't you think so?
Of course it has, but Greece is a vocal and ambassador, let's say, of China to Europe all these last years. And everybody's talking in Greece and I think in Europe as well about the strategic importance of the Piraeus port. So, Yannis, let me continue on this. Do you think there is a will of the Greek government to extend the investment, the Chinese investment in Port of Piraeus?
Well, I think so, yes. There are some fears by local businesses and local communities about the scope of the Chinese investment. But I think with a good discussion and goodwill from all parties, these fears can be set aside, and there could be, in the next months, there could be a green light for a new and bigger investment in the whole port of Piraeus, which I think it's a good opportunity to also promote investment overall in Greece.
And it's a good example, Harry, of the cooperation between Greece and China. What's the strategic importance of the Port of Piraeus for China?
Well, I think it's really a great example of cooperation between China and Greece, and the port in Athens serves as a gateway to Europe. And also, since China has invested in the port of Athens, and it has created a lot of jobs. Before Chinese investment, the port of Athens stands around 100 some position among all the ports in the world. Since the Chinese investment, it has greatly enhanced the position of the port, and now it's ranked around 30th in the world. So we can see continuous efforts of that. So I hope that the investment will continue. So that symbolizes the success story of this Belt and Road initiative as well. And also I think that will really help to use the good example of this project to really dampen the mistrust and also to support the future initiative of cooperation between China and Greece, and also for Europe for that matter as well.
But I'm afraid the Trump administration sees our success in other parts of the world as a loss of American influence. Look at the importance of maritime commerce, an important part of maritime Silk Road. When we look at the success of Chinese investment in the Greek ports, do you think Americans fear that our business stakes here will serve to erode your influence in continental Europe following Brexit by the end of October?
I doubt that there's any serious concern to that effect.
I don't think there's going to be a game of
I was president and advisor to the finance ministry when the sale of the Port of Piraeus to Costco was negotiated in 2015. And I didn't find at that time that there was any noticeable pushback from the American side. After all, it's a facility which handles trade from around the world, and to have it functioning in an effective way is good for Greece, and it certainly is a good sign for the future of these relationships. It is not as though they were forcing out competition from some other source. It was they were the clear choice to handle this particular operation. So there may be some concerns of an ideological nature, but I don't think that they really apply, have any practical effect on American policy.
You said what went wrong on the negotiation of Mr. Varoufakis with the Europeans?
Well, the problem with the Europeans in 2015 is that they were not prepared to modify the terms of the Memorandum of Understanding in a way that would ease the conditions that were being forced on the people of Greece. And that was what the government at the time was attempting to persuade them to do. At the end of the day, the negotiations came to the impasse that they reached in early July.
Competitions for major powers are playing out on multiple fronts when it comes to the idea of Belt and Road. For example, at the same time, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker, the outgoing chief of the European Commission, have just signed an infrastructure transport agreement to link Europe with Asia. My view, many view it as a counter to China's Belt and Road strategy. What do you think of this alleged conspiracy theory, Yanis?
Well, we should consider this agreement part of the overall EU-Japan trade agreement that came into force last year. There are some fears, especially about the influence that China is gaining in Eastern and Central Europe. But I think this is something that the dialogue between EU and China will have a good environment to solve in the coming months. There are good foundations and good arguments in favor of a good relationship between the EU and China. So I don't see any contradiction between Chinese investment in Eastern or Central Europe and also other projects that European Union wants to undertake with other Asian countries. And it could be also a factor for better relations between Japan and China as well, because we don't want competitors, our Asian partners, we don't want them as competitors in Europe, we want them as partners, as equal partners here.
Terry, on this, it seems that for a lot of Europeans, China seems like a systematic rival, and there is a fear in Europe for some countries about China from its influence and its power. What led to this?
Well, I think there's quite a few probably factors on that, because China has a peaceful rise in the past, very fast. China's GDP is adding another Australia each year, so the pace of economy is very fast. On the other hand, also the Chinese system is so efficient. China has, for example, in the last few years, has built a vast infrastructure, like the total length of the high-speed railway is the combination of next 10 countries. So it's very effective. And thirdly, I think the professor was right. There's some ideological suspicions of Chinese system. But as Deng Xiaoping has said, it doesn't matter if it's a white cat, black cat, as long as it catches mice. So if this system is working, if it can lift 800 million people out of poverty, if it can contribute to 30% of world GDP growth, I think EU and the European, and to that matter, the world should accept China's peaceful rise. So I think we should really, dampen the mistrust on China. And so China is doing a lot of things to prove good practice and maybe investment, and also propose the shared future of the mankind to really, have all the countries work together for the peaceful prosperity in the future.
Harry, instead of talking smart about geopolitical suspicions and the idea of investment in this beautiful country of Greece, let's look at tourism. Now, a few from the Chinese middle class, the growing army in the sizable market, would enjoy the idea of a pure holiday, enjoying the seaside view. Do you think Greece and China, two ancient civilization states, would support each other? For example, more Chinese tourists would be coming to learn more about the history of Greece. We need to be more familiar with civilization instead of a geopolitical rivalry in seeking a solution to problems concerning deglobalization or the idea of unilateralism.
Absolutely. I think that China, for the last decade, the number of tourists, outbound tourists, reached 150 million. I just see a new statistic that there's 300 million passports has been issued in China. People-to-people exchange is really useful to get rid of the suspicions of each other and build up the friendly relations. And also the student. China is now the largest student sending country in the world. We had over, almost 1 million students sending every year to different countries, universities, high schools. And also I think Greece and China should have more student exchanges, European and US. So all those people-to-people exchange will really cement the bond for the future development and also get rid of the geopolitical suspicions.
Earlier we talked to Mr. Martin Schulz, the former president of the European Parliament. Let's hear what he had to say about China's role worldwide. Mr. Schulz, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for joining us. It seems that the EU and China have some common stakes on issues such as multilateralism, climate change, and free trade. However, is it likely, Mr. Schulz, that both sides, the European Union and China, will be taken hostage by a third party, a country that puts America first?
I think that's a fact for the time being. In these minutes, while we are speaking to each other in Washington and in Beijing, there are nevertheless strategies to water down, to calm down this tension between the United States and China in the trade relations of both countries. Why I mention it, it is for us, for the European Union, from the highest importance. If China and the United States enter in a so-called trade war, has an enormous impact on the European Union. Your questions concerned our European-Chinese relationship. The European Union has also a very sustainable transatlantic European-American relationship that shows that Europe is, in a certain way, in between. And therefore, I hope that we can calm down the tensions. European-Chinese relations concern two regions in the world, China, the People's Republic of China, and the European Union, who are the strongest economic areas in the world.
Many people in Europe, but all over the world, think that Europe turned its back to Syria. What Europe now, in this crisis with Turkey, should do to correct things?
I think the European Union is not the institution which can solve the most vibrant problem for the times being. You remember very well that we supported the Kurdish fighters against the Islamic State. The problem is that now the United States of America are withdrawing their troops and the support for them. I see that this creates for Turkey that moment for President Erdogan. He waited a long time for it to interfere now and to bring the Kurdish region under Turkish control. This is creating more tension instead to bring more stability. It's not the European Union. We should challenge the United States. We should tell to President Trump that he is weakening the stability of the whole region.
Why Mr. Trump decided to this position?
You know, the President of the United States is an unpredictable man, and in my eyes, he is really a risk, not only for his own country, but for the world as a whole. What he is doing is, he promised during the election campaign to withdraw American soldiers. That was a promise to his voters. But now, in that concrete situation, to withdraw it, is a result of the internal pressure under which he is by these impeachment procedures. And so my feeling is he is sacrificing stability in Syria to gain trust and support of his specific electorate. That means the President of the United States of America is playing for domestic reasons with international risks. This is really a very sad.
Welcome back to our special program of Dialogue with the World. In the second part, we are happy to be joined here by Mr. Vladimir Chizov, representative of the Russian Federation to the European Union. It seems the Russians have been able to establish your military presence in Syria, a war-torn country in the Middle East, a volatile region. But is Moscow very happy about the cross-border invasion by Turkish troops to eliminate the military presence of Kurds who wanted very much to establish their own independent Kurdistan? And what do you think of the dispute that flare up between Ankara and Washington as a result?
Well, first of all, I believe that certain differences between Ankara and Washington appeared much earlier. One of the actually triggers was a deal that the Turkish government signed with my country on regarding certain anti-aircraft systems. Then, of course, if we discuss the situation today with the Turkish incursion into Syria, the Turkish government refers to a treaty between Ankara and Damascus of 20 years ago, 1998, the Adana Agreement, which actually defined certain rules and procedures for providing security of the border between the two countries. Having said that, of course, we see that the military operation launched by Turkey has led to a number of casualties, including a number of civilians, and the goal of creating a buffer zone, in effect driving the Kurds down south and east, would create a certain vacuum. We should also keep in mind that in that part of Syria, the local Kurdish authorities, they have a number of prisons for hardline ISIS terrorists. And if they will not be able to maintain security of those prisons, they will have to open the gates. So where would those people go?
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, so help us a little bit to understand Russia's position. President Putin has endorsed Turkish incursion, but at the same time has put some red lines, let's say. Do you support the Turkish invasion?
Actually, President Putin did not endorse the Turkish invasion. He has declared a certain degree of understanding of the motives. We are not supporting the military operation. We believe that what is necessary now, and that's what the Russian diplomacy is working on, is to establish direct contact between Ankara and Damascus. Because if those areas remain empty, sort of, somebody will need to take control. And we believe it should be the government of Syria. Because what we have supported all along is maintaining sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Following the coup allegations, it seems Ankara is getting very closer to Moscow despite their problems in the past. The issue is European Union feels unhappy about Kurds who allegedly have been betrayed by the United States. Look at the impact of the military drawdown in the war-torn country of Syria. Now the issue is President Erdogan seems to be threatening Brussels with the possibility that he will unblock the gateway and let over 3 million refugees flock to continental Europe. What would be the consequences arising from the cross-border invasion? Yanis?
European Union and Greece consider this threat by Mr. Erdogan as a direct blackmail, and they have pushed back against this development. There is no way that 2 million or 3 million Syrian refugees can arrive on Greek islands, because the northern border of Greece is closed and they will be stuck on the islands or mainland Greece. What is really important now, and since we see this new crisis emerging, is to find a comprehensive solution for the Syria crisis. And one thing that is missing is that the Kurds are not part of the Astana agreement or the Astana process for the peace in Syria and also the new constitution. There has to be dialogue to also include the Kurds, but also to have guarantees for Turkey that it will not be attacked by hostile forces within the Kurdish forces within Syria. So there needs to be an overall understanding how to solve the Syria crisis. There will be overall crisis in Idlib, in the Kurdish regions, in other places, if all parties don't stick together, sit down and agree a final solution to the Syria crisis.
Okay, Yanis, at this point, what is your views as far as the European position? It seems that a lot of Europeans don't take any active role, and many of them, in many European countries, see the relations with Syria through the lenses of the refugee issue. Is this the case?
Well, yes, and I see some European countries are also to blame for this crisis, because France and the UK were facilitating the insurgency of some militants in Syria back in 2012, 2013. And now they don't want to take responsibility for some of the damages that have been done in Syria. So there is some responsibility for the European Union as well. But we need to sit down as international community with Russia, with Iran, with the Syrian side as well, and we need to find a common solution for the people that are now in Turkey. Turkey is carrying a very high burden of 3 million refugees that we need to find a solution where these people will come back. It's not a reasonable solution for these people to go to another region of Syria where they have no relationship with, whereas they could return to their original homes where they left. This is the most humane solution for them to come back to their original places and homes.
Now, Harry, let me ask you, do you believe, let me first quote President Emmanuel Macron as saying, the European continent will never be stable, will never be secure if we do not ease and clarify our relations with Russia. China and Russia are two permanent members of the UN Security Council. When we join hands with the Russian Federation, do you think we're able to balance the primacy of American world leadership?
Well, I think certainly China is playing more and more role in international stability and prosperity. For example, China is the second largest donor to the United Nations system. China is the second largest peacekeeping force sending among the permanent member countries of the Security Council. And China has good relation with Russia, of course. And China has maintained a good relation with the European Union. Of course, China may, right now we have a trade dispute with American partners, but I think in the long run, we need to keep a balance. We see the Shanghai Cooperation is also getting increased.
Shanghai Cooperation Organization,
yeah, Shanghai Cooperation Organization is getting increased. Members, India, Pakistan, also Afghanistan all come in. So it does play quite a lot of role, particularly for the Middle East and the Asian continent and the Eurasia region. So I think the Shanghai Cooperation probably could be one of the stabilizer for the region. So I think China and Russian on Shanghai Cooperation Organization play a key pivotal role there as to stabilize get the countries together. So, but I think in the long run we have to work together with everyone. We see the European Union now have a new leadership coming up. She was the defense minister of Germany. We probably see the EU is getting more geopolitically active or militarily active.
Let's finish with Syria. So let's listen and hear the voice of Russian and American about the Americans' position so far, President Trump's position so far on the Turkish invasion.
Well, let me start by defining our view towards the Kurds. The Kurds are an essential part of the Syrian population. They have their legitimate rights to be there. As Russia, we had been warning them that they should be more careful in choosing their friends. They relied on U.S. support. They helped the U.S. effort in Syria, whatever it was illegitimate, but they did help. And now they feel betrayed. And actually this wave of, I would say even panic, has spread across other countries of the region that are traditionally considered as U.S. allies, including Israel. The Israelis are now talking. If he has been able to dump the Kurds, where is the guarantee that he will not act the same way with us?
Okay. Mr. Galbraith, what is your take on Mr. Trump's position on Syria, on the Turkish invasion? What do you think?
Well, we'll say in modest defense of my country that we're not at war with Russia, and we have never been, and we're not at war with China and have never been. What we are in and what we're experiencing is an untenable position as a result of the actions that were taken notably in the George W. Bush administration, but also in the Obama administration with respect to Syria. And extracting, the United States is never going to stay in those countries indefinitely. It's not in the nature of the modern world that will happen. And so the question is how best to wind up this, the problem and the situation that we're currently in. And I think the correct answer is clearly that one should have sat down and talked through and developed a plan for an orderly rather than a disorderly disengagement. And that's, I think it's unfortunate that we're in the situation we're now in.
We are also joined in the discussion by Madame Gabriela Ramos, a senior representative from OECD and G20. Let's hear what she has to say. Welcome to our program, Gabriela. China has expanded into the European Union, and Greece, Portugal, Luxembourg have all got prepared to sign up to BRI or Belt and Road Initiative. The issue is a lot more others are not ready yet. So what do you think are the barriers that prevent these countries and economies from being part of a BRI so that we'll share the idea of interconnectivity in an age when deglobalization is also gaining momentum?
Well, I guess it's just a sign of the times. The fact is that we are lacking confidence between trade partners. We are lacking confidence between investment partners. And an initiative that has as a core this is integrating and advancing in the infrastructure investment, which is something that per se is good, is being seen by lack of confidence. And I think that there are many questions related to the BRI. People wonder if it is really just a very important project by the Chinese to bring all these countries together and to work together to more infrastructure investment and many other areas in which you are trying to build up bridges, or if it is a geopolitical project of gaining influence in certain regions with other purposes. I mean, these are questions that are being asked.
Do you see any concern about this? The big,
let's say,
economies of the vis-a-vis China?
Of course, there are concerns in terms of what are the real intentions of the project.
In other words, Gabriela, do you think the rise of China is more of an opportunity or a threat for a majority of the economies?
I think that it has been proven that China's growth during the last decades had benefited the world. We were today with the president of Niger, and we know that the African progress during the last 2 decades have been really linked to the investment by China, to the growth by China. We know that the trade tensions now and the slowing down of the whole economy, but including China, is also affecting Europe, because we are talking about global value chains that are integrated all of the economy. So of course it has been positive.
Let me go back to initial issue concerning bilateral relationship between Greece and China in the context of European integration. This process of regional integration seems to be undermined by the impact of Brexit. I'd like to have your opinion, first of all, James, about what's going to happen to the European Union. Will it fall apart as a result of Brexit?
No, I don't think the European Union will fall apart. And it is quite possible that Mr. Boris Johnson will be the shortest-serving prime minister in the entire history of the United Kingdom, because he seems intent upon forcing an outcome by the end of this month, which the large majority of the sitting parliament will not accept.
What's the message of Brexit for Europe? Will it weaken the forces that want more Europe, that they want more EU integration?
Back in 2016, there was the result of the referendum. Many feared that it could bring the resolution of European Union. Well, that is not the case. I think now the EU 27, the rest of the countries, are more stronger together, although there are serious problems that need to be faced in the future. But the United Kingdom incident and Brexit was a big example of what not to do with a membership of the European Union. There were certain issues that the British people had regarding freedom of movement, and also how the decision-making process was going on in Brussels with the British interests. But to decide to just abruptly leave creates much more problems than it solves. That right now there is a lesson to be learned for every country to sit down and solve these problems in a more open-minded and polite way, rather than to take decisions that will disrupt the lives of millions of people.
Vladimir, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the fall of Berlin Wall. What do you think will be the next source of a major geopolitical threat to the continental stability in Europe?
Well, now that indeed this is the year of the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, unfortunately what we're seeing across the world, including in Europe, are efforts and plans by some leaders to build new walls. A wall is being built between the United States and Mexico. There are certain nationalist-minded leaders in Ukraine who want to build a wall between Ukraine and Russia. But overall, the existential threat to European security these days, that the system of European security that has been constructed with a lot of effort through several decades, the 3 decades since the fall of the Berlin Wall, it is now falling apart, because many of the existing arms control and other treaties are being abrogated by one country. There is, after the abrogation of this medium and shorter range missile treaty, there is only one arms control treaty remaining in force, and that until the year 2021. When that is not prolonged or replaced, then the world will roll back to the 1950s, when there was not a single international agreement covering arms control. That would be very bad. And I think it's time for Europeans to start thinking of their own security. Because if the United States, as the protector-in-chief of European security, decides to deploy new generation of nuclear weapons in Europe, Russia will have to reciprocate. President Putin has been quite vocal against such a development, saying that until such thing happens on the part of the United States, Russia will maintain a moratorium. Okay, having declared that, we approached NATO. Why don't you guys join us in a moratorium? The European members of NATO, at least.
There is a strong voice from the German Franco axis calling for establishment of your own proactive deployment of the troops after President Trump urges European leaders to increase more of your shares for the NATO spending. Yanis, what do you have to say about this?
Well, there was a shock in Europe in the last 3 years, and Europeans have realized that they need to take defense into their own hands. And it needs to be a defense mechanism to have the Europeans know that they have the destiny in their own hands. We wait to see, because right now in Europe, besides the crisis with the missiles that Mr. Sizov discussed earlier, the main crisis, geopolitical crisis, security crisis in Europe is the Ukraine crisis. And we need to solve this crisis and also to build Russia again, to bring Russia again on the table of discussions with Europe. Because if we look at the future in Europe, we can't have Russia as adversary for the next 100 years. And also Russia needs to understand that it needs also the rest of European countries as partners. So there is the future lays before us a decision to solve the Ukraine crisis with some compromises on both sides. The Ukrainians need to compromise and realize that the eastern regions need to have some sort of more autonomy, and also Russia needs to understand that the rest of the Ukraine needs to have a sovereign rights to defend itself.
I disagree with the notion that Ukraine represents today a major security threat for Europe. It doesn't. Ukraine is a country in the midst of an internal crisis, and it needs to get its act together.
We are coming to the conclusion,
Yeah.
Excuse me. To address the future of the European Union, we need to hear more about the independent voice of the Fifth Republic of France. Here we are joined also in this special program, Dialogue with the World, by Jean-Christophe Basse, CEO of DOC.
The pleasure to have with us the CEO of DOC, Mr. Jean-Christophe Basse. Mr. Basse, welcome.
Welcome to our special program.
The title of the forum, Rhodes Forum 2019, is Global Disorder. Why disorder, not order?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And if you really read carefully the title of the program, it is the world order and disorder between parentheses. So it can be one or the other. We are 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The world has been going in an, I would say, unpredictable direction. I will not elaborate on that, but as we said this morning, an anniversary is always a good time in a way to take stock and to look at what has happened, why it has happened that way, and also how, the world will be heading. And I think that today, and this is why, we are, as a Dialogue of Civilization Institute, willing to address this issue, is that either we engage in a real, genuine dialogue among all the countries and the culture.
30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we see the emergence of many other invisible Berlin Walls, such as the rise of populism and the rise of a far-right movement. Taking France as an example, Emmanuel Macron was in deep trouble 6 months ago when the anti-established Yellow Vests were staging demonstrations, and Jean Le Pen's National Rally Party surging in polls. So do you think the world is becoming more divided because of hate as a result of populism on the platform of, protectionism and unilateralism?
Well, of course, I mean, I couldn't agree more that we see the rise of new wars or tensions. But what is the cause of that? Again, at DOC Institute, we have the absolute conviction that the reason why there is today such a backlash against globalization, and it is not just about the yellow vest in France, so it is in a way in all part or most part of the world where we see the rise of, call it nationalism, call it populism, call it search for identity or whatsoever. The reality, the why is it that we are in this situation, is that during the past 20 years, globalization has been seen by, let's say, the leading forces as a process of setting standards. We set economic standards, we set trade standards, we set financial standards, so that, let's say, the economic device would work, so that we can increase the flows of goods, the flows of finance, the flows of... And then ignoring completely that there were people behind that, and that the globalization is not just about an economic phenomenon, but that there is also a human, a cultural, and in a way a civilizational dimension. And people today feel that in a way they have been left out, and that this is why there is such a claim for identity. There is such a fear because they don't see themselves as benefiting from that.
Now for the last comment, we're going to finish with economy. And I want Mr. Galbraith a comment about Europe's economy. What do you think? Is Europe in trouble?
Is Europe in trouble? Well, I suppose the answer is compared to what?
Compared to, you know.
Yeah, I think the signs of slowdown in the European economy have been quite pronounced in recent months. Whether they will continue or not is something which I don't care to hazard a forecast. I do not believe that, from the standpoint of the United States, that a European slowdown will materially change the economic conditions in the United States in the next year. And the American economy has, although it's also slowing, stayed really quite strong. The basis of it has been a rather steady expansion of consumer activity. And there does not seem to be any particularly strong reason to believe that will reverse. So a lot will depend upon what happens in China, actually. I think.
Yes, indeed. The United States and China are the two major continental economies where domestic spending would contribute more to the GDP growth.
But I think that you know, I think the European Union does going to suffer if China and the U.S. Trade friction continues. Of course, the European Union already suffered with Brexit, and also populism is rising in Europe, and EU now has going to be sandwiched between China and the U.S. Trade frictions, and then the whole world is going to continue to suffer if the trade war continues. So I think EU is now we are all intertwined together, EU and China and the U.S. So we have to work together. But I think EU does provide a special position. As a matter of fact, EU is the largest economy in the world. I mean, larger than China and the U.S. So if they can play a very balanced and intermediate role to really stabilize the world economy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I think our guests love the setting. We will talk for hours about everything. Okay, the third edition of our cooperation, our co-production with the CGTN is over. Thank you so much.
I
do enjoy very interesting views.
I do enjoy very much the seaside intellectual conversation about the future that we share together in what President Xi Jinping calls a community of shared future to usher in the era of co-prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.